Excuse me, where am I?
Heaven, friend. Or as close as we'll see till Judgment Day.
Best keep such questions to myself, unless I want to get made.
And every year, on this day of days, we recommit ourselves to our city and to our prophet, Father Comstock. We recommit through sacrifice and the giving of thanks, and by submerging ourselves in the sweet waters of baptism. And lo, if the prophet had struck down our enemies at Wounded Knee and not railed against the Sodom beneath us, it would have been enough. If the prophet had just railed against the Sodom beneath us, but not accepted the 3 golden gifts of the founders, it would have been enough. If the prophet had just Is it someone new? Someone from the Sodom below, newly come to Columbia to be washed clean before our prophet, our founders, and our Lord?
I just need passage into the city.
Passage to the city. Brother, the only way to Columbia is through rebirth in the sweet waters of baptism. Will you be cleansed, brother?
With the original BioShock changing the gaming landscape forever, then the sequel following behind to tie up any loose ends left in the underwater utopia of Rapture, it meant that Ken Levine and Irrational Games had to shoot for the stars and hope to settle somewhere amongst the clouds. So that is exactly what they would do by moving the franchise to the floating city of Columbia.
Hallelujah.
BioShock Infinite is a game that would have all the ambition, creative flair, and narrative-driven approach that the series was known for. Though what will strike you more than anything as we remove the rose-tinted glasses that many of us wore upon this title's release is the lack of cohesion. The game would present some brilliant ideas individually, however, when these are intertwined, the wheels begin to fall off. The beginning gives the player promise of the same captivating story as the original. Infinite begins with a complete reversal of the original's opening sequence. While Jack would descend in the bathysphere to the depths of Rapture, Booker DeWitt, the core protagonist of Infinite, would ascend to the lofty heights of Columbia. The player pushes through the clouds and the grand city is revealed in all its glory. The bleak and ominous tones of Rapture are a distant memory as you're bombarded with heavenly light and vibrant tones immediately. The city is bustling with people who are smartly dressed and happy to be there. Again, another thing absent in the destruction of Rapture. It seems like a city devoid of any problems, complete with a barbershop quartet to sing any potential blues away. However, the city slowly begins to show its cracks in subtle ways as you navigate its bubbling islands, such as the deep-seated racism that seems to be commonplace in the city.
Are you gonna throw it, or are you taking your coffee black these days?
Plus the deep reliance on religion that the city exhibits through an omnipresent deity named Comstock. All of this culminates in drawing the player in to invest in this new setting. The development process that led to this new world was a tricky one to navigate through for Levine and his team. Initially, this game was toying with the idea of returning to Rapture and sticking with a tried and tested environment, but the team began to grow tired of this setting and the work suffered in quality as a result. So naturally, there was a move to develop a new, fresh approach. Ken would also try to emulate what the original achieved through a new core focus on an ideal taken to its extreme. This ideal would be American exceptionalism, a theme that was brought to the forefront of the creative team's thought process after they all read The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This, in short, is a theory that the United States is inherently different from any other nation, stemming from its emergence after the American Revolution, and that they must transform the world so that all are indoctrinated in its customs. And through this task of converting the world to their ideals, people begin to see themselves as being superior to others. This heavily Americanized theme is present throughout the game in the patriotic color palette and the patriot-inspired enemies. This game was even supposed to be set during the Renaissance. However, when the Assassin's Creed franchise beat Irrational to the punch, they opted to craft their own vision. The approach they would take towards building this world is remarkable, from the idea to have Columbia secede from America and take to the skies as a traveling world's fair spreading the ideals of American exceptionalism with a neo-Christian ethos, to the rich tapestry of history that bends the tales of reality to suit the setting, such as Abraham Lincoln being vilified within Columbia while his assassin, John Wilkes Booth, is commended as a righteous hero. These parts that give the player lore and intriguing fragments of the story to piece together borrow much from its predecessors and end up becoming fascinating areas to explore. The museum depicting the acts of Comstock is another wonderful example that ties this fantasy setting to the real world. However, it's the areas that don't really connect these together that really hurt the cohesive story this would have been. In a story that deals with such grounded and real-world issues, is there really a place for tears in the fabric of space-time? It's a question that brings us neatly to perhaps the biggest change that this game would make: the inclusion of a companion Booker would have to collaborate with throughout the story in the form of Elizabeth. Elizabeth would prove to be the biggest challenge of the entire development process for Irrational Games. Throughout the early days of Infinite, there were several occasions that the developers considered taking out the core character altogether. This was due to the ambitious task of making Elizabeth act as natural as possible throughout the game. Ken Levine had a vision of modeling Elizabeth after Alex Vance from Half-Life 2. Alex was the driving narrative and emotional force of that title, and Levine wanted Elizabeth to play a similar role within Bioshock Infinite. However, to facilitate this, a sub-team had to be created called the Liz Squad that worked solely on Elizabeth and the technical difficulties that arose from her addition as a core game mechanic. The Liz Squad was responsible for making Elizabeth and her artificial intelligence interact with the environment and exhibit natural, curious behaviors, instead of merely going missing during combat or rigidly walking beside Booker at all times. This would be seen through Elizabeth interacting with machines, objects, and people within Columbia, and due to her being locked away for much of her life, this inquisitive behavior was very much suited to her character. In this respect, the team nailed the tough job of mastering Elizabeth's AI. However, this same AI would prove to be the reason that this title would never live up to the intrigue generated upon its reveal and supplementary demo. Fans were expecting sandbox environments with expansive vertical structures, handrails that went on for miles, or powers that merged with Elizabeth's to create show-stopping spectacles. But instead of this, we got a linear story, environments that were hindered by Elizabeth's AI, which shrunk their scope tremendously. Then, as for Elizabeth's powers, these would boil down to spawning turrets, ammo dumps, and cover. Basically, all the common tropes of a generic FPS shooter of the time, which brings us neatly onto the gameplay of Bioshock Infinite. While the original Bioshock was a terrifically well-made game, mechanically speaking, its success did not rely on its gameplay. It was fun, simplistic, and served its purpose well. Bioshock Infinite aims to offer the same kind of experience as past iterations in a much more expansive setting. So you see more ranged weapons, and Vigors are a straight swap for plasmids. Though the main criticism for this title's gameplay comes through the lack of RPG elements, the lack of context for some elements being present, with the Vigors being a prime example of this, and then of course the laughable difficulty of the game, unless you play on hard. Unfortunately, the success that 2K Marin had seen through their refinement of the streamlined, fast-paced gameplay was also undone as well. Players would no longer be able to hold all weapons and be limited to just 2. While this was an attempt to have players use a variety of guns without favoring one gun throughout, in reality, this only made the player run out of ammo quicker, forcing them to cower until Elizabeth topped up their ammo. This would have been less prominent if tonics weren't also cut from the game, meaning that your melee attack was no longer strong enough to carry you through the whole game if this was your choice. It was more of a last-ditch parry to get cover and reload that slowed down the gameplay and made it feel akin to a generic FPS title in many respects. This was a conscious choice the creative team made to draw in more casual players to the franchise, which would only be supported by the box art depicting Booker with a gun in a generic hero's pose. Ken Levine has always been reliable for some self-referential content over the years, and within this title, it was no different. He would once again lend his voice to the vending machines scattered across the game, this time opting for the phrase,
"A carnival of thrift at your disposal!"
rather than,
"Feel your cravings at the circus of values!"
Then, outside of Ken himself, there would be plenty of callbacks to the original game. Throughout Infinite's run, you can locate the iconic wrench that you find in the opening minutes of the original Bioshock, a gun in the baby carriage making a callback to the slicer you encounter babbling to the pistol. Then when you enter the church before your baptism, the priest says the phrase,
"Is it someone new?"
which of course is a nod to the very first splicer you meet while stuck in the bathysphere.
Is it someone new?
Though the biggest nod to the original is perhaps through how the team would handle the musical stylings of this game. While the original would showcase licensed songs of the time period, this wouldn't have translated well to Infinite's time, as there was a lack of music with any recognizable structure or semblance to modern music, so the team were left with the task of making the score fit into the environment. How they went about this was, firstly, through gathering a handful of well-known modern titles. These were songs like Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, God Only Knows by the Beach Boys, and Fortunate Son by Clearance Clearwater Revival, to name a few. Their second task would be how they made these fit into the narrative, achieved through a character named Albert Fink, who was supposedly hearing these songs as if by magic. These were then revealed to be the result of the tears caused by Elizabeth, and thus the songs had a place within the narrative. Then, to make this repertoire of songs fit inside this universe and timeline, they were performed by barbershop quartets, sang by residents in passing, and you can even locate the tears with actual versions of the original tracks. These renditions of modern music would be made for BioShock Infinite by postmodern jukebox star Scott Bradley, a man who has built a career around recreating modern songs and older musical styles. Bradley was even honoured within the game, as his likeness was used for the character model of Albert Fink.
I will fall before the job is done. But she shall take up my mantle. The Lord is calling me home.
Overall, BioShock Infinite is not the game the world was promised. I say this because the various marketing campaigns, demos, and unreleased gameplay showed various avenues of Columbia that were left unexplored. The game is one that relies on the blueprint of modern FPS titles too heavily. It wedges in content that doesn't necessarily fit the title. It's had to cut its content and scope due to the platforms it would be released on, and it made a lot of changes to what fans loved about the series. Yet there is an inescapable charm that emanates from this game. The pillars of the BioShock franchise holding this game up high are still there. The narrative-driven approach, the focus on seemingly benevolent leaders and their ideals being pushed to the extreme, an outrageous plot twist, and an environment that is alive in every respect. While I do think it's the weakest title in the franchise, I still had a great time playing it. In short, this is a game that had ambitions of being the best game ever produced. However, due to a series of ideas that were cut, changed, or included with underwhelming effect, BioShock Infinite had to settle for being just an outstanding game. It shot for the stars and ended up with its head in the clouds. With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Nihat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
Hey, Miss Elizabeth!
Hello! Oh, this is wonderful! Well, come dance with me, Mr. Twin.
I don't dance. Come on, let's go.
Why? What could be better than this?
How about Paris?
Paris? I don't understand. How could we get there?
That's where that airship's going, but if you want to stay and dance, we can...
No, let's go! Come on, let's go!